Matthew is one of the few immigrant consultants that get it. I honestly think so. He's one of the few people that talks about the immigrant as a human, not a UCI number. Yeah. And like the way he describes his job is amazing. It's 20% legal advice, 80% emotional support. And that's really the immigration journey for you. It's 20% advice, but most of the work or most of the support you need to get through it, or most of what you need to get through is actually support, emotional support. That's what you need. But let's listen to his story. Matthew moved to Argentina 2 years ago. And he talks about understanding what it means to be an immigrant. I mean, he's moved before. He's lived in Macedonia for 3 years. But as we get older, we start to understand things much better. This is a good one to listen to. Enjoy. In the pre-show, you said to me, the boy who left Canada and the boy who's 2 new years now. Like, I want to explore that a bit. Like, so moving from, and I'll dig in here a bit. It's moving from cold Canada to subtropical Argentina, different culture, different pace of life, I would assume. Like, what's it been like for you?
It's been a learning experience. I think that's the best way to refer to it. As a business person, personally, I set goals for myself. My husband and I set annual goals for ourselves. And just as we reached the end of 2024, we were reviewing them. And okay, so did we achieve these goals? But at the same time, life brought us lessons that we said we were open to learning, but we were surprised by some things that you learn in when we decided to dive right in personally and professionally to focus our lives on migration. So when we left Canada, we were moving to a new place to focus on our business and its growth and give ourselves a bit of an incubator and a step away from our day-to-day lives in Toronto to make this big change in our life. But we also wanted to get a refresher on what migration feels like. And so that's what we're going through as well. So we help our clients who are mostly living in Canada while we're living on the other end of the Americas in Argentina, trying to figure out our own way of being in a new country. We came here looking to learn a new language, which is a humbling experience. I actually recommend that every adult do it. There's a bit of a childlike joy of discovering new things, and it develops. One of the lessons I've learned is how to pick myself back up when I feel like I've been kicked down. Because even though Latin Americans are actually very, very kind and patient in general, when it comes to language learning and really helpful, they'll make corrections in a way that's very kind and helpful, not mean. But then now and then you get that one experience. Like I had a doctor who was like, I was feeling vulnerable, talking about looking for medical help from a doctor, and then she made me feel bad about my Spanish language ability. And it's those kind of moments where you don't expect to be kicked down, and you say to yourself, you're like, no, what, Matthew, you have to get back up. You cannot wallow. You can have a party for yourself briefly, but you need to pick yourself back up. So I think I've diverged a bit from the question, but the boy who arrived in 2023 in Argentina, bright-eyed, eager to discover a new country, learn about Latin America, start learning a new language. A year and a half later, I definitely understand some of the realities of moving better. I understand how hard it can be sometimes, how lonely it can be as a migrant, and how humbling it can be when you just don't understand the way things work. Medical systems are different in very small but significant ways.
Yes.
I'm not even going to start on...
Yes. Gosh.
And when you don't know how to navigate, you really need a friend to tell you how things work, because it's obvious to the people who are delivering the medical services, and they're often impatient with you for not understanding why do you not know the most obvious unspoken thing.
Yeah.
And so when you're in a vulnerable position, like I have a medical concern and I need to see a doctor, and in addition to not feeling well, now you're making me feel bad about my Spanish. So those are some of the things I've contended with. I have learned. I've had to harden myself a bit too. I think I've realized that there is something wonderful about Canada in that I think we have a society where trust is actually fairly high. And I have never really been confronted with what that means when there is a high degree of social trust. I've taken it for granted. And moving to Argentina, where there is a very low level of trust in society, I realized that I get taken advantages of sometimes. I'm not even going to get into all of my bitterness about landlords in this country and how rent deposits apparently never get returned.
Gosh.
So things like that. I've learned that I'm maybe a bit too trusting in the world, and I have had to. It's been sad. I've had to harden myself, but these are some of the lessons that I have learned along the way.
Yeah, that's and two things. That thing you say about first of all, the high trust society thing. It's such a thing, So I moved from Nigeria, which is not exactly a very high trust society. And I remember talking to someone who moved from, I think, Colombia to Canada too. His name is Sebastian, and we call that thing. We call it the noise. Like there's a hum in your head all the time that you have to be. It comes from when you're always watching out for what's going to go wrong, what could happen, why is this, and it's interesting hearing someone do the reverse, which is basically go from a place where there's no noise because you just assume that things will work, or like you take people at face value, or you ask for something, and more often than not, the person will do what they say they'll do, to go to the other side where they now start picking up that noise, because that's what has to happen. Like over time, your brain is always humming in the background. It's always asking you questions like, oh, what did they say? Did they mean it? Like, why did they do that? What did that, because for me, is when I moved here, the noise went away, so it's just interesting seeing you say that, like, honestly.
I mean, I see that as a professional characteristic of integrity. I value what my word means a lot to me,
Yeah.
and I don't want to break my word in any way. And so to encounter others who will just flat out lie these are changes that, like I said, lessons. But you see it in, I'm not sure what Nigeria is like, but you visibly see it on the street, how every window has prison-like bars on it, not to keep people in, but to keep people out. And there's stories about, pickpockets, cell phones being stolen, and people wear their backpacks on the front, as opposed to the back.
Okay, that's bad.
Certainly, no one leaves a phone on the cafe table. And these are some of the small adjustments. And I guess this noise, as you call it, that I've learned to adjust. I've adapted to, and I see that and this is what I appreciate about Canada more, is that level of trust, which I really hope we don't lose. I worry about it sometimes, but I hope we don't lose it, because all that noise you mentioned distracts individuals and society from working to a better state.
Yes, I agree. I totally agree. I totally agree with that. Like that noise, the ripple effects of the noise in your quality of life, conversations, stuff you do, how you approach problems, how you solve problems, because the biggest thing the noise does to you is people talk about individuality a lot, and it's a big thing in the world right now. But I still argue with people that the best things the world has created were all done by people coming together to do stuff in groups, whether I want to accept it or not. But people can talk about Elon Musk and all the geniuses and stuff, but they built all they built because they had people who came together with them to do that. You're able to do that to a high extent because of trust. You're living in a high trust society. You take out trust in society, and then it's all people for themselves. Everyone starts to, the incentives change. Like we become selfish. We become, and it's just all the way down there. It's just a mess and chaos and stuff we don't want to talk about.
I think even is in the example of a business, as you said with Musk, any business, even a functional team, if you don't trust your team members at work,
what are you doing?
If you're always looking over your shoulder because someone might, the stab you in the back for a promotion, obviously, but if you're not working together in unison with the goal, or if you have to spend time dealing with the noise before you can focus on the goal, it's a distraction. And I think, at a social level, looking at Canada right now, we have a lot of challenges as a country that we need to have that shared trust. We need to be able to work together, not looking over our shoulders. When people say something, they need to have integrity, which I think we feel like we're lacking from our leaders, so that when something is said, that it is going to happen.
Yeah, we're going to come to this point in a bit, but I want to explore something with you about because the cultural difference it's a ton. I mean, unlike me, I moved from Nigeria to this place. There are cultural differences, but there's English. So the thing about language reduces a lot of barriers. And I think, so I'm just curious, moving from Canada to Argentina, what are the biggest things you've struggled with aside from language? What are the biggest, if you feel what are the things you go oh God, I miss home?
One of the lessons I have learned is social and about friendships. So, I said the boy who moved here in 2023 wasn't really a boy. He was 39 years old. But I've turned 40 while living in Argentina, and I realized that I perhaps took for granted some of the friends I had in Canada because I don't think I was quite aware of how hard it is to make friends as an adult. And I think this is something migrants experience into a new country, because there's all of the subtle cultural differences that all the things you don't know, the unspoken assumptions that you have to figure out. On top of that, the language barrier. So I'm limited to people who either speak English or are really patient as I develop my Spanish language skills. But then people don't have time. Again, we're talking about individualism. Everyone spends more time within their four walls at home on their phones. We go out and spend less time in groups than we used to before the pandemic. There's a global discussion about how we're all becoming more isolated, and our social connections are fading. I think it's a 2025 problem that a lot of humans don't know how to be friends anymore, including Canada and the United States. But I also think at a smaller level, a lot of us have trouble meeting new people, have trouble speaking to strangers, having trouble initiating conversation, and that is part of why our social fabric, I think, is disintegrating. I push against it. I've always been more outgoing, and I joke about myself like a child. I will just go and smile and speak my broken Spanish with confidence and just try. And it works out enough times that I keep doing it. But I've learned that despite as much as I might be outgoing or trying, some of the socially, it is hard to move to a new country, especially as an adult. I've always said that college or university is the best way to move to a new place and build a new friend group. But without it, so I've moved to Argentina without a job, without a college or university, and it has taken a bit extra effort in order to make friends.
It's really interesting hearing you say this to me, because So like when I moved to Canada, you get the sense that, and I call it like the cultural cachets that exist. And so because you're at a certain age, I was 36 when I moved here. So you come here and it feels like the friendship groups that already exist. And you have to work almost 10 times hard. And this is with the fact that I don't speak English to kind of break into those groups, because like there are times I've gone to people who invited me to stuff, and I got there and I sat down with 10 guys talking. They were talking, and I found out that I couldn't say, like, the conversation was just going over my head. Shoo, 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 because I don't understand what you're talking about. I'm not yet interested in hockey that much. I grew up watching soccer as a Nigerian, so hockey is still a thing I'm trying to get used to. They knew all the players. I don't know all the players. There's just all those things. And all of a sudden, like, I think part of why I started is what it really starts to hit you that you're the other here. Like, you're the other person. Like, there are things you don't know. Yes, you all probably maybe share a beer together, or you all have parents. But aside that, once you all come in friendship groups like that, no one wants to talk about the kids like that. Like, oh yeah, the kids, go away. We won't talk about stuff that is almost not serious. And then you're not in that serious conversation because you literally haven't spent time doing the things they did. And so you're either just listening.
Yeah.
Just listen and listen. Sometimes you try to butt in, but even when you talk, you kind of get the sense that, okay, they're being polite. Like, what you said probably is just on the fringes. Like, you're talking of you don't know it yet. And that realization can be so. It's one of those moments when what you said earlier on, like, is about, like, it's one of those moments where you have to pick yourself up and say, you know what? Like, this is just what it is. And it's just a journey I have to go through. And if you don't try and put yourself out there, you never get better. You're always just going to stay at every day probably gets better the more you put yourself out there. But it's a crushing realization, to be honest. It's really a really emotional realization that you're like, this is.
Yeah. And I've heard about how difficult it is to make Canadian friends, how Canadians feel, how there's this kind of barrier, and a lot of newcomers in Canada have been a relatively easy time making friends with other newcomers, but have trouble making friends with Canadians. And so, as someone Canadian born, I've always thought about, how do I like to think that I am open to newcomers, open to other people, and trying to welcome them into my life. And I've wondered if this is a Canadian cultural thing. And then being in Argentina has helped me see the flip side of it. Exactly what you're saying is part of how it just takes more time to integrate socially is that we don't have the shared reference points of childhood. I don't think shows or music to talk about. Sports, yeah. I have hockey. I played hockey as a child. I did not like it, but I played it. I tried it, but I did not play soccer, football. And so when people in Argentina are going on and on about football, like, I just don't get it. So we don't have that shared connection.
Yeah, I think first of all, I struggle with it a bit, but I think once you, like I said to you before, I think it was in pre-show, like once you learn to kind of step back and you start to understand that it's not, I feel like if you feel like a victim, you always be the victim if you say to yourself that no, it's people are just being people. You don't have the shared cultural reference with them. And because of the age at which you're at and the things you have to do, because I can imagine for you, I don't know if it feels the same way for you, but the first 2 years feels like you're on a checklist. Like you have things you need to do. You have things you just have things you need to do. And so friendships and stuff is like extra work because you actually have to make the effort to say to yourself, because or else you get caught up in, oh, I need to get my medical stuff sorted out. I need to get my business sorted out. I need to get going. I need to start making money. I need to get a house. I need to settle it. I need to find my way around. I need to do stuff. And then you look up and it's 2 years and you're still trying to settle it.
I think I believe settlement is often referred to as a 2 to 4 year period, and then integration is what happens next once you have the
Settled.
settlement. I'm thankful that I don't have to work on professional integration because that's the hardest part. We're
Always
running
tough.
from home and we have to focus on social integration, but social integration is harder without professional integration or
Yeah,
without,
professional helps. Yeah, it helps.
yeah.
It helps.
But
But again, just curious. Let me ask you this question because because you're Canadian. Let me ask you this question because, but some people would argue that social also help professional because sometimes the friendship circles is like a soft landing for learning the cultural cachets and nuances that drive professional. Professional is more brutal. You mess up and you either just get labeled or you get fired or you just get put in a box like, okay, this is who you are, and you just find it hard to get out of that box. What are your thoughts on that?
it I think professional is certainly more brutal, as you said, and I think a lot depends for a newcomer in a country on having one or more connections. Ideally, I think of Argentina is not the first country I've migrated to. I also lived in France for about 9 months on an exchange program, and in Macedonia for a bit more than 3 years. In Macedonia, I had a very good friend who actually helped me find a job. That is the reason I moved there, and then really helped me build a social life. And then my work also helped build my social life because I was working at an international school. So the professional. So I had the one in, I had the cultural in through a Macedonian, and then I had the professional that helped build my social. Um, on the flip side, in Canada, I do think that having the social connections help you understand the way the professional world works, helps you understand some of all these unspoken things, and how they work, so that somebody can kindly tell you stop doing that or do this instead.
Yeah.
So you don't have to feel that embarrassment in the workplace.
The office, yeah. Okay, I want to switch over to what you do right now because I've said this to you before on LinkedIn. I really appreciate the fact that you bring the human touch to immigration. And I'll first throw you into deep end and ask you a very direct question. Blaine Kumar of Improved have said this to me before, and I think about it a lot. He says that he has this theory that our immigration process could improve a ton if we add a human element to it, in the sense that if you think about moving to Canada, like let me think about myself. I applied for PR. The only time I saw a human being was when I got to the border and when I did my swearing in. Throughout your immigration process, like you don't talk to a human being. Like you probably just get everything is through some. And he argues that it's a small thing, but it's significant. Just humanizing the process a bit, like I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that. Like, do you think that helps? Because I see how you do it, and I'm like, this dude gets it. Like he approaches it like we're not just UCI numbers. There are people behind those numbers who have full lives and who have full perspectives on stuff.
So I think of two things come to mind. One is there's a lot of debate about that citizenship ceremony that has been moved online, and saying, no, there's something important as a society, that there has to be some in-person shared communal experience to having the citizenship ceremony. We could talk about that a lot. I have thoughts about it, but to keep focused on your question, I also think about how a lot of other countries have an in-person interview. You go to the embassy, make a visa appointment, you speak to an officer. And Canada does not do that for visitors or for permanent residents. In Canadian immigration, if you get an interview, you should be afraid, because that means
You're in trouble.
There are some issues that they want to probe on you, or to probe through. But I do see how there could be seen as this lack of humanity in the immigration process. I don't know if the human needs to be inserted into the immigration process, which is legal and administrative. I think the human perhaps could. I think Canada wants to do settlement well, but is still figuring out how to do settlement well. And I'm not trying to throw the whole settlement services sector under the bus by any means. I know there's a lot of people who care deeply and are working hard to make it better. But yes, you almost, other than a border agent who is not the most comfortable experience.
Yeah.
They might say welcome to Canada, but you're afraid before you go to them. There's that apprehension. So I do think that, if we want to see people as more than UCIs, as more than economic units and workers who will help grow the economy, I think if we really want to be an exceptional country of immigration, we need to think better about how we make newcomers feel part of that of society. What is this welcome committee? And I think the best example we have in Canada is the private refugee sponsorship process. I was involved with what's called the Group of Five. This model has been adopted by other countries. So what happened during it's been around for years, decades, but during the Syrian refugee crisis, I was part of what is known as a Group of Five. We were actually 10 people. We got together, we raised a minimum amount of money, and we said we are taking personal responsibility for the financial and professional and social well-being of this refugee. So here in Canada, we welcomed him at the airport. We drove him, and we had dinner with him that night. My husband and I were responsible for helping him with employment, introducing him to people. And so there was this group of people providing wraparound support to help make sure this guy had professional and social integration support. And now, there's no obligation for us to stay in touch. Sometimes people become friends. We're still in touch, but we didn't also want to smother the guy.
Yeah.
If we could think of some way in which newcomers could have this kind of personalized support system. I think of this how I used to work in the college and university sector, and we would have orientation, have peer mentors. If we could take some of this thinking to helping newcomers, if we really want to be serious about the social, the cultural, and professional integration of newcomers, we need some bigger new thoughts about just letting people show up and then wander their way to a settlement agency if they need help. But it's a lot to ask.
It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, actually. It's a lot of work, but it's worth thinking about because, the way you described it now is actually scary. Like, which is that you come all the way in and then you start asking questions and just wander to find the settlement agency and you're not sure. Sometimes you're sure. Sometimes you have someone who help you. There's just a ton of stuff coming, and like there's a word you use when you're describing the medical system, which is that they're just small things, but they're significant. Like, so they seem like they're nothing, and for everyone else they are nothing. But for you, who's packed your life into 2 suitcases, and you're trying to settle in, and you're missing home, and there's just all of that thing going on. It is a ton of stuff to deal with emotionally.
And I think we would maybe build back some of the positive sentiments around immigration in Canada if more Canadians talked to newcomers and understood where they're coming from, heard them say positive things about Canada and why they came here. Because we're going through this. I'm really concerned about the attitude shift in Canada and some of the sentiment, the things that are being expressed I've never seen in my life, and certainly not in the 10 years I've worked in immigration. I find it very concerning, and I think, how do we start to shift that, especially as we are all alone at home on our cell phones and not talking to other people, and reading increasingly horrific things on Meta in the years ahead. How do we continue to feel that we want new strangers, new foreigners to come in and be a part of our country? I think we're going to need to have some big new thinking about immigration in the years ahead. I really hope that a new government, whatever shape or form that is, I hope will take some of the challenges we faced in recent years to really think take the opportunity to think big, to think differently about how we can improve immigration so that Canada continues to be a leader in the world on doing immigration right, because we have long been admired for a number of our programs. I'm worried that we are losing this, that we are losing support, and that is going to be immensely damaging to Canada over the long term if we do not get immigration right. So I hope 2025 will be a year where we can switch from worry to thinking about bold new ideas about how we can shake off the status quo. If Canadians are not feeling good about the way immigration has been done, great. Let's talk about how we do it better, and let's put our energies, let's focus together on how we can do immigration better for the better of Canadians and the betterment of future Canadians who are new arrivals.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
because like I think there was a Global Mail article you shared sometime last year, which said Canada is the one country that Canada and immigration, like this is the one country that owns the immigration brand. And you're right, it does feel like the past 6-7 months, that brand has taken a beating. Like that brand has taken some damage in a pretty interesting way. Just curious, like, I mean, do you have any ideas on how we can have a better conversation? Any thoughts on how because for me, like, that's a big thing I really want to explore this year is how do we have a better conversation about immigration in Canada, and make it a Canadian thing? Because I feel like what we've spent last year doing is the conversation seems to have almost gone into the immigrant versus Canada. I'm like, no, we can't have that. It's a Canadian conversation. It's the immigrant and Canada win-win. That's what works. Any thoughts on that?
So I think we need most Canadians to we need to help Canadians understand what the immigration system is like. First of all, I think there's a lot of misconceptions. There's an educational need here. Whenever I speak to Canadians who are trying to help some like a study permit applicant, and anytime they learn how newcomers are treated by Canada's immigration system, they're horrified. First of all, because they don't realize just how the system treats people as UCIs and not humans, and
Yeah.
how how opaque it is, how
Yeah.
the delays, and how they're like, no, surely I can contact my MP and my MP will do something. I laugh. And I'm like, I wish you were right. So I think so. My first thing is we need to do some kind of educational advocacy work to get Canadians to understand the way the system works and to understand what the experience of newcomers is. I think that there needs to be some empathy building. I don't have the answer to how we're doing that, but I think that's a need. I also think if Canadians understood how competitive the system is, they might be. I think they would be surprised. I'm working on writing some things. For example, I would not qualify for express entry. I'm working on a new piece that says I'm not good enough to be a permanent resident. And I think most Canadians
Yeah.
have some sense that a lot of people are coming to take advantage of the country and that they're coming to exploit it. And while certainly the Globe and Mail and the Liberals have done a great job of putting out these negative stories in the past year, most newcomers are exceptionally talented people who want to build a better life for themselves and to contribute to the betterment of Canada. They are not opposed to Canada. They're not trying to exploit the system. They're trying to help. They have a belief in Canada as a country. Newcomers are cheerleaders. They've bought into the dream of Canada and
Yeah.
want to build the country, not extract from it. And I think that is another shift that needs to happen.
That's a really good point. That thing about I'm not good enough. Like, gosh, that's some really egoless writing you about it, dude. Because I mean, I came here as a PR, and I think part of why I started this was sometimes I would talk to people, and I'll come off and I'll say to them that, like, not trying to brag. I had an MBA. I worked for Diageo, like one of the biggest companies in the world. And I'm like, and it's not just me, like the people you're talking about and just summarizing them under that one block, and immigrants, like these are humans with full lives and who have done amazing things. And yes, there are bad actors. Like the people who come here who commit fraud. The people who come here with bad intentions. There's all that. I agree. But it's almost like saying, I think, and this is Blaine's analogy. Blaine, thank you for his analogy. I've mentioned his name a lot here. He says it's almost like saying, because accidents happen, we aren't going to drive cars. It's almost like saying that. Oh, so accidents happen, so we aren't going to drive cars anymore. We're all just going to work.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's a very sensitive topic. So round up here, I have one more question for you, which is basically seeing all you've experienced. Like you've lived in France, Macedonia, and now Argentina, and I feel like this last experience is pretty eye-opening for you, because I feel like as you get older, you start to appreciate some of these things. You start to notice them much more easier, because when we are younger, we move through life at a very fast pace that sometimes we just gloss over things.
We do, we don't think.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. How does this influence how you approach your job? Like, because you're an RCIC, like you're in the weeds, helping people navigate that system, that opaque system. How does it help you in work with what you do?
It helps me make sure that I bring the human to my work every day. Fundamentally, I think with any work you do, people can be challenging or frustrating sometimes. Yep. And the personal experiences I have with dealing with the medical system, for example, help remind me that when my client is feeling similarly frustrated or vulnerable in Canada, that even if they have communicated me in a way that I don't like, that I have to put that aside and understand where emotionally they are right now. I describe my work as 20% legal advice and 80% emotional support, because I often people just need someone to listen to them, because the government will not. There's nowhere to call. There's no one to get help. I help people understand how to make decisions within their situation, to understand their risks, or to just understand what they can and they cannot control at this particular time. And so sometimes we talk about the specific application that we're working on, but then I often have conversations with people who are in big cities in Canada and have been there for a year or two, and they're struggling to make friends in a big city. And I can relate, because I say, what, I'm in a city of 15 million people, and I'm not very good at the language. And I totally get it, because sometimes I think someone invites me for dinner, and we're like, we're going to be friends, this is going to work out. And then something happens, and it's like,
oh gosh.
And I think I can relate to this sense of loneliness that I think a lot of newcomers in Canada have, the sense of how, how challenging it is to integrate professionally, socially. Most newcomers, I think, are pretty savvy with knowing they have to figure out how things work at a logistic. But it's the surprises that come a little bit later. Much like when I came to Argentina, I knew housing. I need to how to exchange, get money in Argentina, because this is a different economy. If you, it is a very different economy than Canada's. So.
Honestly, like someone telling me, it's so interesting when I have these interviews, because it's always like as if I'm listening to someone tell me about what I went through. Because you're so right. Like I tell people that all the money things, banks, stuff, they're important, but they're the easiest part of immigrating to society. It is the easiest part. It is the easiest part. The hardest parts are because you can't, to describe them are extremely hard, because you have to dig into yourself and ask yourself the questions about what is really going on with me here right now. Like, what am I struggling with? Why do I feel empty all the time? Why did I just sit by the window and drink coffee and wonder what did I do? Did I make the right call? Should I have done this? Why do I miss home so much? Like, why does mom's call be the best thing to come in today or whenever she calls, that sort of thing. Yeah. And the last question I have for you is, would you do this again?
I'm not ready to do it again. Tell you that it was draining in ways that I
Yeah.
did not expect.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe I'll answer that in part by telling you what I'm doing. I use the word I'm a migrant. I did not immigrate to Argentina. I came here for an unspecified time, and I have learned many of the lessons that I wanted to learn. I've developed the level of proficiency in Spanish to get to the level that I wanted to get to for now. And so my husband and I have decided to migrate again. And the theme of 2025 is return migration. And we are going back to Macedonia to feel living there for a time. Now that we are older and smarter, we can explore potential for me to get status there if we wish to remain there longer. And then we're going to go back to Canada as well because we need to reconnect with family and friends.
Yeah.
We're going to step back and then think about where we want to be. We are very privileged as migrants in that we have choices among countries to live in. Not every migrant in the world has that privilege to choose. And so I don't take it lightly. And so we are in a period of reflection about where we want to live and or how long we want to stay in a particular place. We may in a year be looking to move again. I also know that Argentina, despite some of the things I said about the challenges here,
it's a beautiful city. It's a beautiful country.
Country is part of my heart now, and I cannot wait to come back. It hurts me deeply to knowing that in 2.5 months I'm leaving this country. I'm already thinking about how and when we may come back. So
nice.
So would I do it again? I mean, I'm so thankful that we did it. I have learned so much about. I consider myself a student of migration.
Nice.
I've learned so much. I am continuing to learn. I'm not done learning. And I'm looking forward to the next chapters of life that will teach me different lessons, and so that I can then look back at myself and at that young boy who knew that is getting a bit wiser.
Oh yeah, thank you so much. This has been really, really. Oh gosh, like this is so good. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you.
Guys.
Oh no, thank you. Like, oh gosh, I totally enjoyed this. That was such a good episode. I really, really enjoyed talking to Matthew about his journey and just about how we can have a better conversation about immigration in Canada. Because whether we want to accept it or not, the Canadian brand has suffered some damage immigration-wise. But as usual, thank you for your support. Thank you for getting to this point. If you know someone we should talk to, send them our way. If you know someone who finds this helpful, send it to them. Please like, share, subscribe. Follow us on YouTube, Substack, we're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcast. Thank you again and have a beautiful day. Ciao.